We're following a developing story involving yet another one of President Trump's U.S. attorneys. A federal appeals court ruled that Alina Habba, the president's former personal attorney, is unlawfully serving as the U.S. attorney in New Jersey. It's the same reason a federal judge in Virginia dismissed the Justice Department's cases against James Comey and Letitia James. CNN's Caitlin Polantz is following the story. Seeing a pattern here, Caitlin.
There is a bit of a pattern. The big picture is that the appeals court today, now this is appeals court that only applies to Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, of course. What they are saying is that the Justice Department, the Trump administration, they can't do a runaround of Congress. If there's somebody that is nominated to one of these U.S. attorney positions and then doesn't get confirmed by the Senate, that's what happened with Habba, then the Trump administration tried to...
All right, stop everything you're doing right now, because what I'm about to tell you is absolutely massive and could genuinely signal the beginning of the end for the Trump presidency as we know it. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit just handed Donald Trump one of the most devastating legal defeats of his entire political career, and that's really saying something, given everything this man has been through in the courts over the years. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this. The ruling is so catastrophically bad for Trump that serious people in Washington are now openly talking about the possibility of resignation for the first time. That's not clickbait designed to get your attention. That's not me being dramatic for views. That's the actual political reality we're living in right now, as Trump's legal walls continue to close in from every single direction imaginable. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Trials when he was facing, particularly in New York, when he was facing personal troubles. They were very familiar with her because she came out and she talked to the cameras a lot.
Yeah.
What do we think is going to happen next there?
Well, now we have to wait and see exactly what the Justice Department does. Do they appeal again? They have that possibility to go either to the full Third Circuit Court of Appeals. This was 3 judges in unanimity here saying that she cannot be the acting U.S. attorney in this manner. They can go to the Supreme Court next. Right now, she's going to be disqualified from overseeing 2 criminal cases where they had protested, and Abby Lowell, who argued this for these criminal defendants, said that they're going to continue challenging Trump's unlawful appointments of these U.S. attorney appointees. He also is one of the people challenging Lindsay Halligan in the Eastern District of Virginia, though there's no appeal there. But there's a lot going on here, and it also wasn't a great week.
Here's what just happened that has everyone in political circles absolutely stunned and scrambling to figure out what comes next. Trump tried to fire Democratic members of independent federal agencies, specifically the Merit Systems Protection Board and the National Labor Relations Board, because he wanted to install his own loyalists who would do whatever he wanted without any pushback or independent judgment. A lower court looked at what he did and said, absolutely not. You can't do that because federal law specifically protects these people from being fired without cause. Trump's legal team appealed that decision, confident that a higher court would see things their way and let Trump have his way like he's used to getting. But the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals looked at their arguments, considered them carefully from every angle, and said no. Not just no, but a resounding 2-to-1 rejection that found Trump's appeal has essentially no likelihood of success whatsoever on the merits. Come on, think about what that actually means for a second and let it really sink in. A federal appeals court, one of the most important courts in the entire country when it comes to cases involving the federal government, just told the President of the United States that his legal arguments are so fundamentally weak that he has no realistic chance of winning this case when it's fully decided. That's not a minor setback that his lawyers can spin as a temporary obstacle on the way to eventual victory. That's a devastating blow that signals Trump's entire legal strategy for controlling the federal government is falling apart completely before our eyes. The court affirmed the injunction blocking his firings, meaning those agency members Trump wanted gone are staying right where they are in their positions, and there's essentially nothing Trump can do about it through the normal legal process. The ruling came down on December 4th, just yesterday, and it's already sending shockwaves through Washington and political circles across the entire country. Judge Patricia Millett and Judge Nina Pillard formed the majority that voted against Trump's request to stay the lower court's ruling while his appeal proceeded. These are serious jurists with impeccable credentials who looked at the law and the facts and concluded that Trump simply doesn't have a legal leg to stand on in this fight. They cited Humphrey's executor, the 90-year-old Supreme Court precedent that established Congress can protect certain agency officials from presidential removal without cause, and found that Trump's arguments for overturning that precedent are simply not going to succeed at the appeals level under any reasonable reading of the law. And here's where the resignation talk starts to make sense and why people are taking it seriously for the first time in Trump's presidency. Trump has been fighting battle after battle in the courts, trying to expand his power beyond constitutional limits, trying to control agencies that are supposed to be independent from presidential interference, trying to fire people who won't do what he wants, and he keeps losing over and over again without exception. The courts keep telling him no. The legal system keeps blocking his attempts to consolidate power in his own hands. And at some point, when you keep losing this badly and this consistently, the political mat starts to change in ways that can't be ignored. The people around Trump, the advisors and allies who have stuck with him through everything over the years, they're starting to wonder how much longer this can go on before the damage becomes completely irreparable. This defeat comes on top of all the other legal battles Trump is fighting right now. The constitutional crisis over defying court orders on deportations, the Supreme Court case about firing agency heads that's coming up on December 8th, the ongoing criminal investigations, the Supreme challenges from Congress. Every single week brings new legal problems. Every court ruling seems to go against him. And this DC Circuit decision is particularly damaging because it shows that even when Trump appeals to higher courts, he's still losing badly. Okay, let's really dig into this court ruling and break down exactly what happened and why it matters so much for Trump's presidency and potentially his political survival going forward. Because this isn't just another routine legal setback that will be forgotten in a week when the next scandal hits. This is a fundamental rejection of Trump's entire theory of presidential power that could have lasting consequences for his ability to govern effectively for the remainder of his term. I want to make sure you understand the full picture of what's happening here and why serious observers are now openly discussing scenarios that seemed completely unthinkable just a few months ago when Trump was riding high. First, let me explain what this case is actually about, so you have the proper context for understanding why the ruling is so significant and why it matters for every American. The Merit Systems Protection Board and the National Labor Relations Board are independent federal agencies that handle incredibly important functions, protecting federal workers from unfair treatment and ensuring fair labor practices across the entire country. These agencies are supposed to be independent from presidential control by design, meaning the people who run them can only be fired for cause, not just because the president disagrees with their decisions or wants to replace them with political allies who will rubber stamp whatever he wants. Trump decided he didn't like the Democratic members serving on these boards, so he fired them. Just like that, without any process or justification. No cause cited whatsoever. No legitimate justification provided beyond the fact that he wanted them gone and wanted to install his own people instead who would be loyal to him personally. The fired officials challenged their removal in court, arguing that federal law specifically protects them from exactly this kind of arbitrary firing by a president who simply wants different people in those positions. A lower court agreed with them completely and issued an injunction blocking Trump's action, ordering that the firings were invalid and the officials should remain in their positions until the legal issues were fully resolved. Trump's legal team then appealed to the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, which is one of the most important courts in the entire country when it comes to cases involving the federal government and executive power. They asked the appeals court to stay the lower court's injunction, meaning they wanted the court to pause the injunction and let Trump's firings go into effect while the appeal was being decided over the coming months. This is a common legal maneuver in cases like this. You ask the higher court to let you do what you want to do while the case works its way through the system, so you're not stuck waiting for months or years. But here's where things went very badly for Trump, and his legal strategy fell apart completely. When appeals courts consider whether to grant a stay like this, they look at several important factors, including whether the party requesting the stay has a likelihood of success on the merits of their appeal. In plain English that anyone can understand, they ask whether you're probably going to win your case when it's fully decided after all the briefs are filed and arguments are heard. And the DC Circuit looked at Trump's arguments carefully and concluded, no, you're not going to win this case. Your appeal has no likelihood of success whatsoever. We're denying your request for a stay. That's a devastating finding for Trump's entire legal strategy going forward. It's one thing to lose a case on the merits after full briefing and oral arguments where both sides get to make their best case. It's another thing entirely to have a court tell you at the preliminary stage that your arguments are so fundamentally weak you have essentially no chance of prevailing when the case is fully decided. That's exactly what happened here. Judges Millett and Pillar, two of the three judges on the panel, looked at Trump's claims and found them fundamentally lacking in any legal merit. The court specifically cited Humphrey's executor, the 1935 Supreme Court case that established the constitutionality of protecting certain agency officials from removal by the president without good cause. Trump's team has been arguing aggressively that Humphrey's executor was wrongly decided and should be overturned after 90 years, but the appeals court wasn't buying that argument at all. They found that under existing law, which Humphrey's executor represents, Trump simply doesn't have the constitutional power to fire these officials without cause, no matter how much he wants to. And until the Supreme Court says otherwise, that's the law that governs everyone, including the president. Now, there is a complicating factor here that I need to explain, so you have the complete picture. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear a related case, Trump versus Slaughter, on December 8th, that could potentially change everything about how this area of law works. That case directly challenges the constitutionality of removal protections for independent agency heads. If the Supreme Court overturns Humphrey's executor in that case, then Trump might ultimately win this fight too down the road. But for now, at this moment, the DC Circuit has told Trump clearly that he loses under the current law as it exists today. And here's why this ruling is particularly significant, even with the Supreme Court case pending on the calendar. It shows that Trump can't count on the lower courts to give him what he wants while he waits for the Supreme Court to potentially change the law in his favor. He asked the DC Circuit to let his firing stand while everything gets sorted out over the coming months, and they said no in the strongest possible terms. That means the officials he tried to fire are staying in their jobs. That means his attempt to reshape these agencies according to his preferences is blocked for now. That means his entire governing strategy is hitting a wall that he can't easily get around through normal legal channels. The political fallout from this ruling is already becoming apparent across Washington and beyond. Trump's critics are pointing to this as yet another example of the courts rejecting his attempts to expand presidential power beyond constitutional limits. They're saying this proves the legal system is actually working, that the checks and balances built into our government by the founders are holding up against Trump's efforts to consolidate control in his own hands. They're arguing that Trump's entire approach to governing is fundamentally lawless and that the courts are the last line of defense against authoritarian overreach. But even more significantly, there are rumblings from within Trump's own circle about what this means for his political future and whether he can continue effectively. When you keep losing in court over and over again, when your signature initiatives keep getting blocked by judges, when your legal strategy keeps failing spectacularly, at some point people start asking whether it's sustainable. Can Trump actually govern effectively if the courts won't let him do what he wants to do? Can he deliver on his promises to his base if every attempt to reshape the government gets tied up in litigation and injunctions for months or years? The resignation talk that's emerging isn't coming from Trump's political enemies who would love to see him gone. It's coming from people who have supported him and genuinely want him to succeed, but are genuinely worried about where this is all heading. They're looking at the cascade of legal defeats piling up and wondering if there's a path forward that doesn't involve continued humiliation in the courts. They're calculating the political damage of constant legal battles versus the possibility of a strategic exit that preserves some dignity and influence for the future. I want to be very clear. I'm not predicting that Trump will actually resign. That would be an extraordinary development that goes against everything we know about his personality and his approach to challenges throughout his career. Trump has always been a fighter who doubles down when facing adversity rather than backing down or admitting defeat. But the fact that resignation is even being discussed seriously in political circles, that's itself remarkable and reflects how badly this legal situation has deteriorated for him in recent weeks. All right, so let's break this whole situation down into the key points you need to understand, because there's a lot happening here, and I want to make sure you can explain to anyone why this ruling matters so much and what it means for Trump's future as president. This isn't just inside baseball for legal experts and political junkies. This affects the direction of the entire country. So let's break it down point by point so you really understand what's at stake. Point number 1. The DC Circuit found that Trump's appeal has no likelihood of success whatsoever, which is a devastating legal finding that signals his arguments are fundamentally flawed at their core. This isn't a close call, where the judges had to think hard about which side was right and could have gone either way. This is a clear and unambiguous rejection of Trump's legal position by experienced jurists who know this area of law inside and out. When an appeals court says you have no likelihood of success on your appeal, they're basically telling you that you're going to lose and you should probably start preparing for that outcome rather than hoping for a miracle. Trump's lawyers tried to convince the court that they had strong arguments for overturning the protections on independent agency officials, and the court simply wasn't persuaded at all by anything they presented. Point number 2. The ruling affirms that existing Supreme Court precedent protects these officials from being fired without cause, and that Trump has to follow that precedent until the Supreme Court explicitly says otherwise. Humphrey's executor has been the law of the land for 90 years since 1935. Presidents of both parties, Republican and Democrat alike, have operated within its constraints because that's what the Constitution requires. Trump's legal team is trying to get that precedent overturned, but until the Supreme Court actually does that, the lower courts are going to enforce the existing law as written. That's exactly what happened here. The D.C. Circuit said, look, we have to follow Supreme Court precedent, whether we personally agree with it or not. And that precedent clearly says you can't fire these people without cause. Point number 3. This defeat makes it nearly impossible for Trump to reshape these independent agencies before the Supreme Court rules in the Slaughter case, and even then, the outcome is genuinely uncertain. Trump wanted to fire Democratic members and install Republican loyalists who would implement his agenda without any pushback. The courts have blocked him from doing that completely. Even if the Supreme Court eventually rules in his favor in the Slaughter case, that ruling won't come for months, and there's absolutely no guarantee the Supreme Court will give Trump everything he wants. They might issue a narrow ruling that doesn't completely eliminate protections for agency officials. Trump is stuck waiting and hoping, which is not a position of strength for someone who campaigned on being a winner. Point number 4. The accumulation of legal defeats is creating real political problems for Trump that go far beyond any individual case or ruling. It's not just this ruling we're talking about here, it's the pattern that's emerging. Trump keeps going to court expecting to win, and he keeps losing over and over again. The constitutional crisis over defying court orders on deportations, the challenges to his executive actions on multiple fronts, the ongoing criminal investigations that won't go away. Every single week brings new legal problems and new defeats. At some point, the constant drumbeat of legal losses starts to affect how people perceive Trump's strength and effectiveness as a leader. He campaigned on being a winner who gets things done, but the courts keep telling him no, and that contradiction is becoming harder to ignore. Point number 5. The resignation talk emerging in political circles reflects genuine uncertainty about whether Trump can continue governing effectively under these legal constraints. I want to be careful here because resignation talk can be overblown and speculative, but the fact that serious people are even having this conversation is itself significant. They're looking at the trajectory of Trump's legal battles and asking hard questions about sustainability. If every attempt to reshape the government gets blocked by courts, if every expansion of presidential power gets challenged and overturned, how long can this situation go on? What's the end game here? These are the questions that even Trump's closest allies are starting to ask themselves privately. The bigger picture here is about the fundamental limits of presidential power and whether the courts can effectively check a president who is determined to push those limits as far as possible, regardless of what the law says. Trump has made it very clear that he believes the president should have expansive authority to control the executive branch, including the power to fire anyone for any reason at any time. The courts, at least so far, are saying no firmly. There are limits to what presidents can do. There are protections that Congress has established that the president must respect, and until the Supreme Court changes the underlying law, those limits are going to be enforced by judges across the country. This creates an ongoing tension that's likely to define the rest of Trump's presidency, however long that actually lasts. He wants to do things the courts won't let him do. He keeps trying anyway, despite the legal obstacles. The courts keep blocking him at every turn, and the political pressure builds with each new defeat. Something has to give eventually. Either Trump accepts the constraints and operates within them like every other president has, or the Supreme Court changes the law to give him what he wants, or the situation becomes so untenable that dramatic changes become necessary. The December 8th Supreme Court arguments in the Slaughter case are going to be absolutely crucial for understanding where this is all heading. If the conservative majority signals they're ready to overturn Humphrey's executor and give presidents complete control over agency officials, then Trump might ultimately win these battles down the road. But if the court is more cautious, if they decline to completely eliminate protections for independent agencies, then Trump is going to keep facing these legal barriers for the rest of his term. What I can tell you with certainty is that this DC Circuit ruling is a major blow that Trump's team did not expect and cannot easily recover from. They thought they had strong arguments that would persuade the court. They thought an appeals court would be more sympathetic than the lower court was. They were completely wrong, and now they're left hoping the Supreme Court will bail them out, which is never a comfortable position to be in when you're trying to govern the most powerful country on earth. The political implications for the 2026 midterms are also significant and shouldn't be overlooked. Democrats are going to use these legal defeats to argue that Trump is lawless and out of control, constantly trying to grab more power than the Constitution allows. Republicans are going to counter that liberal judges are blocking the legitimate actions of a duly elected president. This fight is going to define the campaign narrative in ways that could affect control of Congress. For now, we watch and wait to see what happens next. The Supreme Court arguments on December 8th will be the next major development everyone is watching. Then we'll have to wait for the court's ruling, which could come anytime in the following months. And all the while, Trump will be dealing with the political fallout from this defeat and all the others that have accumulated. Stay tuned to this channel, because this story is far from over. The legal battles are continuing. The political pressure is building every day. And the question of Trump's future, including whether he can or will continue serving as president, remains genuinely uncertain in ways it hasn't been before. This is absolutely wild, and you're going to want to follow every development as this situation continues to unfold.